There's a particular kind of person who exhales the moment a dog rests its head on their lap. Not because the dog said anything comforting. It didn't have to. You've probably met this person. You might be this person. They can sit in a room full of humans and feel more alone than they do sitting in silence with a cat. They trust a horse's stillness more than a friend's reassurance. And somewhere along the way, they stopped questioning why, because it simply felt true, the way certain truths do before anyone bothers to examine them. But here's the question worth sitting with. What does it actually mean when the safest presence in your life doesn't use words at all? Most people assume this is simply about liking animals more than people. That's the surface story. It's not the real one. Because underneath it, there's a nervous system that has learned something very specific, something about which signals mean danger and which ones mean rest. And once you understand what that system is actually doing, this pattern stops looking like a preference. It starts looking like a survival strategy that never got the memo that the danger passed. Most people never talk about this in those terms. They just say, "I've always been more of an animal person," and leave it there, as if that sentence explains itself. It doesn't. Something built that preference. Something taught a nervous system, over years, that fur and silence were safer bets than faces and conversation. Now, there are a few different versions of this person, and they don't all arrive here the same way. Understanding which one you are, or which one someone you love actually is, changes what this pattern means entirely. The first type is the one almost everyone recognizes immediately. The person who spent years being whatever other people needed them to be. At home, at work, in friendships that quietly required constant performance just to stay welcome. They learned to read a room before they even opened the door. Who was in what mood? Which version of themselves would be safest to bring in today? And an animal never asks for a performance. A dog doesn't care what you achieved this week. A cat doesn't need you to seem impressive, agreeable, or easy to be around. There's no audition. There's no version of you that gets more approval than another. That makes sense once you think about it. If you've spent your life auditioning for love, the first creature that asks nothing of you can start to feel like the only honest relationship you have. Think about what a holiday dinner actually asks of this person. Track who's tense. Manage the silence before it turns into something worse. Laugh at the right moment. Disagree carefully or not at all. Now think about what walking a dog around the block asks of them. Nothing. The leash doesn't require a performance. The dog doesn't notice which version of you showed up because every version gets the same open, uncomplicated welcome. Researcher Mary Ainsworth, whose attachment studies at Johns Hopkins University and later the University of Virginia shaped how psychologists understand early bonding, described how children adapt their behavior around inconsistent or conditional caregiving, learning early which parts of themselves are welcome and which parts need to be managed or hidden to keep a relationship intact. That adaptation doesn't disappear at 18. It just changes species. But here's a nuance that complicates the simple reading. This isn't automatically a wound needing repair. For some people, the ease they feel with animals isn't avoidance at all. It's simply the one relationship in their life that finally isn't a negotiation. And that can be a genuinely healthy corner of an otherwise exhausting life, not a symptom waiting to be fixed. If something in this video found you, you're probably someone who has been carrying this for a very long time, quietly, without many people noticing. There's more to this story than I can cover here. And I think you already know that. Link in the description. And in the first pinned comment. Still, that's only the first type. And the second one operates by a different logic entirely. The second type isn't performing for approval. They're protecting themselves from unpredictability. These are the people who grew up in homes where affection didn't follow a pattern. Where warmth on Tuesday didn't guarantee warmth on Wednesday. Where the same person could be safety and threat within the same hour, sometimes within the same conversation. And here's the thing about a nervous system raised in that kind of weather. It doesn't stop scanning. Even in adulthood, even in rooms that are objectively safe, it keeps checking faces for the storm it once learned to expect. Animals don't storm. A dog's mood doesn't swing because of something you said wrong 3 days ago. A cat doesn't punish you with silence for an offense you're not even aware of. Whatever they're feeling is usually right there on the surface. No subtext to decode later. No tone to replay at 2 in the morning wondering what it really meant. That predictability is the entire relief. Picture the difference concretely. A friend goes quiet for a day, and the mind immediately starts building theories. Did I do something? Are they upset? Should I apologize for something I haven't identified yet? A dog goes quiet for a day, and it almost always just means the dog is tired. There's no hidden meaning to excavate. Nothing to decode at midnight. And for a person whose whole childhood was spent decoding, that absence of subtext isn't boring. It's oxygen. Researcher Stephen Porges, known for developing polyvagal theory during his years at the University of Illinois at Chicago and later the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University, described a process he called neuroception, the nervous system's largely unconscious scanning of the environment for cues of safety or threat, happening underneath conscious awareness, faster than thought. Human faces, Porges observed, are extraordinarily dense with information. Microexpressions, tone shifts, pauses that might mean nothing or might mean everything. For someone whose neuroception was shaped by unpredictability, that density itself can register as risk, not because people are inherently dangerous, but because the signal is too complicated to trust in real time. Animals, by comparison, offer a simpler, more consistent set of cues. And a nervous system exhausted from constantly overreading humans will, inevitably, find that simplicity restful. And that changes how you might see this pattern. It's not that these people are bad at connection. It's that their body found one place where connection doesn't require constant translation. But there's a third group. And this one is probably the least talked about because on the surface, it looks like the opposite of wounded. This group didn't necessarily grow up performing for approval. They weren't necessarily raised in unpredictable homes either. Nothing obviously went wrong. And that's exactly what makes their story so easy to miss, including, often, by the person living it who spends years quietly assuming something must be broken in them because everyone else seems to handle a crowded room without needing 3 days to recover from it. The third type isn't necessarily someone who grew up unsafe. They're someone who grew up absorbing more than most people do, in every room they ever entered. Psychologist Elaine Aron, whose research on what she termed sensory processing sensitivity has been associated with Stony Brook University, described a temperament in which the nervous system processes sensory and social information more deeply than average, noticing subtleties, picking up on undercurrents, registering the emotional temperature of a room before anyone says a word. Aron's research suggests this trait shows up in a meaningful portion of the population, and it isn't a disorder. It's simply a different setting on the dial. For a person wired this way, a conversation with another human being isn't just an exchange of words. It's an enormous amount of unspoken data arriving all at once. Tone, posture, subtext, history, expectation, and processing all of it is, quite literally, more effortful. An animal doesn't generate that same flood. Its signals are simpler. Its presence doesn't ask you to interpret 16 layers of meaning behind a sentence. That makes the quiet feel less like isolation and more like recovery.
Picture a party for this type.
20 conversations happening in one room. 20 sets of tone, expression, and subtext arriving simultaneously, and a nervous system trying to process all of them at once, without a filter to slow the intake down. By the end of an hour, most people in that room feel mildly tired. This person feels like they've run somewhere. And then they get home, and a cat walks across the back of the couch and settles against their leg, offering exactly one signal: calm, simple, unmistakable, and something in the body finally exhales. And maybe that's the deepest reframe in all of this, because the story most people tell about this type is that they're antisocial, or cold, or somehow bad at people. And the truth is closer to the opposite. It's not that they can't read people. It's that they read people so completely, so automatically, that being around too many of them for too long becomes its own kind of exhausting. Now flip it. Because there's something else here, something you feel but can't always explain, especially if you've noticed this pattern getting stronger rather than weaker over the years. Because there's a shadow side to all of this, and it deserves honesty, not just comfort. An animal can never really disappoint you the way a person can. It can't withdraw its love as punishment. It can't leave you for someone else. It can't see the parts of you that you're most ashamed of and decide on that basis that you're too much, and that safety is real. But if it becomes the only kind of closeness a person will accept, if human connection gets quietly avoided rather than simply preferred over, the comfort can start doing something else underneath. It can start protecting a person from ever finding out whether they could survive being truly known by another human being. That's not true for everyone who feels safer around animals. Most people in this pattern still want closeness with people, just on terms their nervous system can actually tolerate. But it's worth asking yourself, honestly, which version of the story is yours. Because there's a difference between resting in the company of animals and hiding there. Resting looks like a full life that also happens to include a dog who understands you without effort. Hiding looks like a life quietly rearranged year after year so that no person ever gets close enough to require the kind of trust that could actually be broken. One is a preference. The other is an avoidance wearing a preference's clothing. And little by little, without realizing it, a person can drift from the first into the second without ever noticing the exact moment it happened. One of the loneliest feelings in the world is being surrounded by people who need you, and realizing that none of them actually know you.
They know what you do for them,
They know how you show up.
but the version of you that exists,
When you're not being useful to anyone, that version, most of them have never met. If that resonated, I've spent a long time writing about exactly this feeling. It's linked in the description and in the first pinned comment. Now I need to say something directly to you, because this whole video has probably already told you which of these you are, even if you haven't put words to it yet. Ask yourself something. When you feel most like yourself, genuinely unguarded, without performing anything, who or what is usually in the room with you? And if the honest answer is a dog curled against your leg, or a cat asleep on the back of the couch, or the particular quiet of a barn in the early morning, that's not a small thing to notice about yourself. Ask yourself something else, too. When was the last time a person made you feel the way that animal does, unguarded, unmeasured, not being quietly evaluated for how well you're performing the role of friend, partner, or reliable one in the room? If the answer takes a while to arrive, that's information, not failure. It doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean you failed at being close to people. It means somewhere along the way, your nervous system found the one relationship that never asked you to be anyone other than exactly who you already are. That deserves to be understood, not diagnosed. Because here's the deeper truth underneath all of it. Safety was never really about species. It was never really about fur versus skin, silence versus conversation. It was about finding one place where you could finally stop translating yourself for someone else's comfort. And maybe the real work isn't choosing between animals and people at all. Maybe it's learning to bring a little of that same unguarded ease into the human relationships that have earned it, slowly, carefully, with the people who've actually shown you over time that they're safe enough to deserve it too. I'd genuinely like to know where you landed in this video. Tell me in the comments which type felt most like you. The performer learning there's no audience to please, the one still scanning for the storm, or the one quietly absorbing more of the room than anyone realizes. I read every one, and this is exactly the kind of thing that becomes a much deeper conversation down there. If this helped you understand yourself a little more clearly, consider staying around. There's another video coming that goes even further into where these patterns begin, and what actually starts to shift once you can finally see them for what they are. Because the people who feel safest with animals were never running from human connection. They were just waiting for it to finally feel as honest as a dog resting its head on their lap.